First of all, thank you very much for the talk. Are there any questions from the audience? I can already see how this relates with things that are happening also at the DIE, for example, the chromatology, gazetteer for time, and so I'm sure there are points from. Yes.
Yeah, maybe I should know this, but I forgot. So you have this relationship bonds with, and you don't have the simple relationship arrow, but you reify this thing, this bonding thing. Why is that?
We actually had a really long discussion about this because there were multiple possible ways we could do it, and the most simplest one would be just to have a long list of different types of relationships, which would be properties, and we could simply link one person to another. And we did actually work out that list, and it got really, really long. And so that was sort of one downside. It also meant that we couldn't hang additional information on it in quite the same way. So we had a look at doing it with classes as well and didn't like that as much. So we came up with a sort of medium way where we have this has-bond relationship and then we have a bond class, which we have a bunch of different types. We can also dual class it. So if you want to say adopted sister, then it has an adopted class and it has sister class on it. But it then allows us to actually add additional properties on at that level to say where this information came from, who is making the claim for this bond, where it's coming from, provenance information. So just that sort of extra information that we wanted to have the opportunity to link with the bond statement rather than linking with anything else. And so that sort of came for us as a good compromise solution, which allowed us to add in this extra information but didn't make it too much more horribly complicated, because we didn't want to go the entire CDOC way of doing it and having to say that this person's a sister because there was a birth event which involved the same set of parents and this sort of thing. For a start, we didn't know that was true. I mean, probably, but you know, even then it gets a little bit debatable. So this also, you know, especially, you know, Alexander, would we have a birth event involving Jupiter as the father as well as Philip, or, you know, one of the other things with those that also caused a fair amount of discussion is that currently the bonds are basically one way. You can trace them back, but they're not automatically inverted. And again, this has caused some discussion, and we've sort of chosen it this way because that is what it says in the text. We have in the text, X is son of this person. Now, we sort of assume that that means the inverse is true, but that's a big assumption on our part. So what we decided was to stick as closely to what we were being given through the textual evidence as possible. And if you want to make the inference that if X is the son of Y, then Y is the parent of X. But again, then you're going, you don't know which way the gender is, you don't know additional information. So, you know, this way it's up to the user what level of assumption and inference they want to use. And it is possible to do it. It's not us having made that assumption and forced it on them through the ontology.
More questions?
Do you have any feedback or let's say information with the original systems? So do you give your snap ID as a stable ID backwards to the originating systems, and do they show that in their original systems additional to their old ones, or ones so that they suggest to refer to their own data sets using snap IDs instead of their old ones, because that's more interlinked or more permanent? Or so how's the interaction with you and new IDs back to the systems you got their information from?
So not instead of their identifiers.
Well,
in addition to, yes. That's certainly the intention. The only data set I can think of that is likely to do this in the very short term of the 5 data sets that Faith showed that we have is likely to be Trismegistos, because it's a very dynamic project which has all of the information online and is changed all the time. So I'm pretty sure they will have snap identifiers visible on their pages very, very soon. And the added value of that, of course, is that Snap, while all the Snap identifier says about 99% of Trismegistos persons this is a small amount of the information we got from Trismegistos. So at the moment it's less information than there is natively. As soon as we have a merge with another database, as soon as we have an annotation from outside, as soon as we have a scholarly statement attached to that, there'll be more information there that may be useful to the users of Trismegistos. This, I think, potentially could be true for all the data sets, and as we go forward, I hope it's in a sense we'll have failed to achieve anything. This doesn't become more the norm in the future, that people will use the Snapdragon graph as the principal way of identifying a unique person. It's going to be that much easier than saying this is LDPN X and Trismegistos Y and PIR Z and whatever, all in one footnote. You could say this is Snap and you can get all the other information from there. But as I say, this would very much be supplementary to the way I think people, we don't expect people to stop citing the Lexicon of Greek personal names or PIR. I mean, those are authorities. They're very, very authoritative. They have a lot of history and a lot of research behind them. They're printed volumes that people can go to and get all sorts of information out of, as well as the digital information. And this, in both cases, there's more information in the printed volumes than there is in the digital information. But I feel like the last part of your question I haven't answered, but I can't remember what it was. Sorry.
So how does, if you merge persons, how does it work with the bonding? So if one person is bonding with another one, but the other merged not, will the merged person inherit it, or if the merging is disputed, will there be a disputed inheritance? Or?
Right. This is the difference between currently what we have is the merging, so that's where we have unassailable evidence that these are the same person.
They're not just the same person, they're the same record.
They're not just, they're the same record. And so we are getting slightly different information through from different projects for the people we know are the same record. And we just put all that information into the same record. They inherit from all the people they replace. This is different from what we will get when we start having scholarly agreement. And then a new person will be created, and where they merge together, they will inherit the information, but you will have, opportunities to say, I don't think this fits in, I think we have another person which has got this information, which is slightly different. And so this is part of the sort of Snap 2 idea, that we will be able to make it a little bit more fine-tuned and say, as a scholarly argument I'm putting forward, I think these two people merge together, and therefore the information that is true about both of these people is information about this new person that I've created, and somebody else to say, actually, I think this person, this other person are the same person, and that's different, and this is the information that applies to that merged person. So at that point it becomes a little bit more fun as to how inheritance will work. But largely merged or otherwise created resources will inherit from the entities that they are created from. It's just currently there shouldn't be any argument about everything being inherited forwards, and we'll deal with argument next. Because we've met academics and we know what they're like, and they like arguing an awful lot. So that's going to probably be more difficult to model than people in general.
The most important thing, though, is that so anyone who is a merged record, so a person who is not inherited from a single database, but who has been joined from persons inherited from multiple databases.
Or
Every-
even maybe merge person from one database
Right.
if they've
Or,
decided to merge later.
Merge within a single database. And in fact, even persons who aren't merged at all, who are just inherited from a single database, we're very explicit for every piece of data we give on them that they inherit from the original datasets, where that came from. So we will always say date according to LGPN, date according to PIR. This relationship with that person according to both LGPN and Trismegistos, if it's identical information. So it'll always be very, very explicit where that information came from, because the information in the triple store is still in the original data form that it was ingested. So it's only inherited via the reasoning that is done to generate the, for example, to generate HTML pages, but can also be used to generate other kinds of queries. But it'll always be explicit where that data came from.
Speaking of triple store, your fourth store thing, how many triples do you have without it breaking down?
Well, it hasn't broken yet. Let me just go and see.
A few million is not a problem.
Probably 10 million, probably not 20 million, I'm guessing. We'll find out in a moment. 16 million?
So that's currently what's going on in the data store. I'm not sure if that's how many in there or how many it's processed. I'm not entirely sure what those numbers mean, but yes, that's 16 million quads that it's certainly been doing something with. Either that or, and yeah. So, and this, it currently hasn't hiccuped at all. It's still going as fast as it was when we started. So even the data ingest doesn't take very long, which is quite nice. When the RDF doesn't have errors in it, so I have to go and fix it, then, well, really I need to write a script that does them all at once, but it takes maybe a couple of minutes for the biggest ones and is pretty much instantaneous for the smallest ones. The only current downside is that I have to take the front end offline to do it. But again, there are other ways of doing it. It's just this is the easiest and quickest while we're starting off.
But scalability of Foster shouldn't be a problem, right? Because it's also supporting, I think, clusters of triple stores. So you can set up like a cluster of instances of what? I haven't tried it, but apparently that should help if a really large number of
It's one that's supposed to be able to deal with a lot of data before falling over. So if we start having problems, then we'll rethink and either check this or start having a look at Algom or something, which is supposed to be able to take the entire internet. But even then, it's as long as you give it enough memory. So yeah, currently we're not worried about running out of speed on the triple store for a while yet.
More questions? I have a very technical one. Do you have a relate between the original snap identifier and the merge identifier it takes after the merging? So if I deliver some data and
Yes.
one of my records gets merged
Yes.
and then gets a new snap ID,
Yes.
is there a relate between the original ID and the merged ID?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
At the moment it's a manual redirect.
Okay.
So if you put in the old ID, it'll show you, it'll be like the equivalent of a, what is it?
So here's the merged one,
Yeah.
and then we have the link to
The original one.
the original one. What will actually happen again as part of the prettiness process is this replaced one will become slightly more greyed out, and we'll have a big thing at the top saying, you know, we believe this information has been superseded by this one, you want to go and look at it. We don't want to put in an automatic redirect because people might want to go with this version. They might not want to go to the merged version, so we're not going to force it on them. We're just going to strongly suggest. What this also currently doesn't do, but we hope to add in shortly, is to be able to return this information as RDF and JSON, but from this URL by plopping a /RDF or /JSON at the end as well. So you can download the person data easily But the slight downside is that this page has actually been put together with multiple queries. So, well, it worked when it was just a single query. Now we've just got to do a little bit more finessing, so you'll get all the information that relates to the person rather than just the base data.
More questions? We're not. I have a final one on the future plans. So once you have modeled the scholarly disagreement, I think, well, as far as I can tell, you're ready also to open up the merging potentially to the community. So allowing people to say, I think these two records are actually the same. So in a way to crowdsource, at least to some extent, the merging of records. Is this something that you are even considering of?
Yeah, we also want to see how much automation we can add in as well. I mean, some of the first steps will just be going through and saying, we've got references for everything, let's see how many people are actually referencing the same string. But even when we have the automation version, we want to put what is returned up for checking. So there's some discussion about crowdsourcing that as well. So that, the computer says, we think this is true, vote yay or nay. But yes, once we start allowing people to be able to follow the discourse in making merge statements, then definitely we're looking to expand to allow people who are not us and who are not directly part of one of the data partners to make statements about the thing. Whether they publish it on our system or publish it on their home system, it is another question. I think what we really want is for people to be able to make those statements on their home system and publish it to the collective. So we're not storing it at that point, they are. In the same way that with the Pelagios, you're making the annotations on your text and you're publishing your data set to say, here is my text annotated with these people, so you can publish your data set to say, here is my annotations on the data, here is how I think the merging works. And that gets linked in, obviously with proper accreditation, but also with proper provenance, so that you can come along and say, that person out there I think is a crackpot, I want to ignore anything that he's said, and just look at the rest of the graph.
Yeah, the attribution of this data then becomes even more important, and I can imagine multiple stages where you have some of this automated work proposing possible co-references, proposing possible relationships, maybe even based on social network analysis or something, showing patterns and say, look, this cluster of people and this cluster of people look very, very similar, could they be the same? Where they can actually create records and say these records are attributed to this software, and one could say, that this software has a very low probability of being right all the time, but it's at least data that we can work on. And again, crowdsourced data will have a certain kind of attribution which will, to start with, be relatively low while it's being crowdsourced by Galaxy Zoo, but when it's been community sourced by the however many there are, 80 active prosopographers in the world, will then suddenly be very high. And so I can see we've got the capacity for lots of various different quality degrees of data.
And this also brings in the question of certainty as well, and that will be another thing that's obviously going to be part of the scholarly discourse, in that you want to say these two people are probably the same person. I might not be able to make a definitive statement about it, but I'm sure enough that I want it recorded in the data, but I'm just flagging it so you can make your decision about whether or not you agree. So that then again that adds into, well, not only the level of complexity, but also trying to support the users so that they can see where the data has come from. And so again, these sort of opinions are not being forced on them, as it were, but are being provided so that they can then use their expertise on how to use it.
My sense, though, is that modelling this ability to make annotations on there while while I think important, is probably not the highest priority at the moment. We imagined that it would, when we started, that it would be something we would do pretty soon, and it would be a fairly important thing we want to do. At the moment, I think the highest priorities for what we want to do with this are ingesting much more data. I think we'll actually hit 1 million triples very soon. Not triples, we've already got
Persons.
16 million triples. We'll hit 1 million persons very soon, or rather 1 million person records.
Yep.
Which will be slightly fewer because we're going to have lots of overlapping data sets by then. I mean, all of the library catalogues we have will overlap by very large degrees. But I think we need to get many more data sets in. We need to experiment with getting in some data sets that are not yet in digital form. So I want to get an out of copyright public domain prosopography, OCR it, see how quickly we can get some relatively crude and dirty information out of that, which is just a list of headwords that we can then mint the URIs for and put them in and see if we can then merge them with existing data sets. I want to see the communities, people who are working around the various existing prosopographies, working with this data. So working to help enrich the data, working to incorporate this data in their own material. I think all of those things need to happen much more urgently than the ability to model whether so and so in 1994 believed this and what the argumentation was, and whether we disagree, and what it changes in the model of the graph if we believe it and if we don't. Those sorts of things I think are, while very important, very exciting, I think they're not feasible until we've got shitloads more data than we currently have. And that's...
And if I may suggest, indexes of books are also a great resource for more data.
Yes,
you can pass them,
yes.
when the OCR is good, you pass them
Yes.
easily, and then you get
Yes.
indexes of people.
Yeah, I've actually got a project for a student, if anyone knows a student, it would just take them a few hours to do this, just to take the index of a translation of the Iliad. There's one translation which has a very good index that lists every single person in there. You could just, OCR that straight away, suddenly you'd have, because the one thing we're missing, because not many traditional prosopographies have, that we've always talked about, is, and this is a problematic term, but I use it anyway, is fictional people, or let's say mythological people, or people who aren't, because most prosopographies are very interested in historical people, people to whom you can attach dates, people to whom you can attach, where they lived, and they can be attached to facts and so forth. And Achilles is very problematic. What dates do we attach to him? Okay, we can maybe make up a date if we believe that the Trojan War was around the fall of Troy 7A. But what about Athena? What date do we attach to Athena? Well, infinite. She always has been and always will be, right? So that there's much more interesting issues that arise there. And people who are not people. I mean, gods may or may not be people. Monsters probably aren't people. Animals. Saints are saints somewhere in between gods and people. There's all sorts of interesting things that come when we start modelling in very different ways.
Can you distinguish in a Latin model between fictional and non-fictional?
At the moment, we haven't looked to distinguish between fictional and non-fictional. We do we use the Lord ontology for distinguishing between different kinds of agent.
Okay.
And Lord has 4 kinds of agent: person, deity, monster, and group. Monster may be a mythological creature, I don't know what they call it, but, and group. So at the moment they don't distinguish between in those areas.
Because personally I want to add in layers of reality, so that you distinguish the mythological people because they exist on a given layer of reality in which they are true within that reality, whereas other people we know are true within a slightly different reality which may or may not overlap. So we've got to arm wrestle for that one later. I think the other thing is that some of this stuff and having these conversations are conversations that we need to have with prosopographers and how they want to deal with the data. Some of the fun stuff with doing things with the graphs, with how the truth relates if there's a disagreement thing, that's the point also we start getting in some of the really hardcore computer scientists and say, look, social network data with no privacy implications, go wild. And try and drag that in as well, because You know, I think we can make the linked data, semantic linked data work in the ancient world better than we can in the modern day, because everybody's dead. There's no problem with us accidentally outing Caesaro, or, you know, Caesar coming back to sue us because the pictures of his mother have got out or anything. So you can actually start looking at some of the really hardcore computing questions on this sort of data without facing some of the problems that you do with the modern data. So I'm hoping once this starts getting big and we can get the big data sets, then we can start getting those guys interested as well. I mean, we know we've made it when the CIA comes and knocks on our door. Then we'll be running out the back and blaming it on everybody else. But, you know, the idea is to get the data to this state that, you know, not only can we continue working on it from the humanities perspective to how do we model what we need to model for prosopographic, I cannot say that word, for historians and other people working with the ancient data and how they need to do it for their scholarly discourse, but we can also make the data sets available for people who are interested in studying the sort of social networks you get regardless of the era.
Yeah, this is very much also one of the other things I think we need to do next is we need to experiment with actually doing research with this material. So I want to see not only some of the examples I gave of creating new data sets, I want to see you know, a research assistant creating a complete new prosopography in a scholarly way, not just by scanning an index of a book, and doing that directly in and based on and using Snap. So it'll be a Snap native complete prosopography. It'll be a relatively small one, but I also want to see someone doing web science research in this way. You know, using and contributing to Snap natively as they go. And I think if we can demonstrate that both of those things are useful, that will serve not only as useful sort of user studies to see in what ways, what parts of Snap are useful to researchers and what parts could be made more useful, but it'll also be good evangelical work when people can see, you know, this is a real research tool. It's not just something pretty.
Well, not pretty currently, yeah.
Great. I think it's about time to move to the mic. So thanks again.
Thank you.